It is a fearful thing to lead this great, peaceful people into war, into the most terrible and disastrous of all wars. But the right is more precious than peace, and we shall fight for the things which we have always carried nearest our hearts, for democracy, for the rights and liberties of small nations.
Woodrow Wilson, 28th President of the United States. A recognized scholar and president of Princeton University, he entered politics to serve as governor of New Jersey. Later, as the Democratic presidential nominee in 1912, he prevailed over a split Republican Party. 4 years later, Wilson campaigned for re-election on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." The war was a conflict in Europe. It would be called the Great War, the war to end all wars, a total war of mass destruction. Despite his campaign promise, Woodrow Wilson would involve the country totally in this war, both at home and overseas. Europe in the early 20th century was the scene of tremendous feelings of nationalism. There was a great pride in being French, or British, or German. And with pride came rivalry, intense rivalry, especially between Great Britain and Germany. This led to competition for empire and an arms race to build bigger and better weapons. As they struggled for power and dominance, the countries drew up a complex series of military alliances among themselves.
There was a long buildup, but in retrospect, seeing all of that, it is very tempting to say that Europe was trying to come to terms with the power of Germany. Germany unified after 1870, increasingly the most powerful economic power. It was Germany and how to deal with Germany, among other things, that led up to the war.
The countries of Europe were all poised and armed to the hilt. Europe was a powder keg. All that was needed was a spark to start a war. The spark that caused the Great War was an assassination. In a small country in southeastern Europe, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary was assassinated by a nationalist from Serbia. Austria-Hungary was determined to punish Serbia. Russia mobilized troops to aid Serbia. Germany responded by declaring war on Russia and France. When Germany invaded Belgium to attack France, England declared war on Germany. Soon the continent of Europe was engaged in war. The carnage had begun.
And interestingly enough, one of the factors that so accelerated the movement toward war when tension first erupted after the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 was the fact that these armies were so large, millions of men in the Russian army, the German army, the Austro-Hungarian army, and the given state of technology was so relatively primitive, especially transportation technology, that the people who ran these military establishments felt that if they didn't begin immediately to mobilize them at the first sign of trouble, they would not be able to get them into the field in time.
As news of the fighting reached the United States, it seemed to most Americans that madness had replaced reason. But the Atlantic Ocean provided a large geographic buffer from the war. And whenever European countries fought each other, the United States had always tried to remain neutral. President Wilson was quick to proclaim that this policy would continue. But neutrality did not mean non-involvement. The United States attempted to continue trading with both sides. But economically and culturally, the United States leaned toward the Allies.
In the course of events, we became the trading partners of one side, the British and the French side, but because of the British control of the seas, we're really prevented from trading with the other. And then, of course, there was this great cultural fact that Bismarck, the first great German chancellor of the 19th century, had summed it all up when he said, "The greatest fact of the modern era is that the Americans speak English."
As the war in Europe intensified, so did the competition for the goods being delivered by American ships. Not only did each side need those supplies, each had a vital interest in preventing the other from receiving them. Both Britain and Germany began violating U.S. neutrality. The British searched U.S. merchant ships and seized goods bound for the Central Powers. German violations were much more severe. The Germans proclaimed a war zone around Britain and threatened to sink any enemy merchant ship entering the area. The Germans had developed a submarine, the U-boat, and it was difficult for the U-boat crews to tell the difference between neutral ships and those of the enemy. It would only be a matter of time before disaster struck. In May of 1915, the British passenger ship Lusitania was torpedoed by a German U-boat off the coast of Ireland. Hundreds of people died, including 128 Americans. Americans were outraged. Former President Theodore Roosevelt accused Germany of murder and piracy. Wilson demanded an apology and reparations. The Germans accommodated Wilson with an apology and compensation, but they would not admit the sinking to be an illegal act. Wilson exercised restraint, and the U.S. remained out of the war for the time being.
There is such a thing as a man being too proud to fight. There is such a thing as a nation being so right, it does not need to convince others by force it is right.
Almost a year passed with no incidents involving Americans. Then, in the spring of 1916, German U-boats struck again. This time, the French steamer Sussex. More American lives were lost. Wilson now demanded Germany abandon submarine warfare altogether, and he threatened to sever diplomatic relations. In January of 1917, Germany announced unrestricted submarine warfare in the British war zone against all merchant ships. Within a few days, the United States broke off diplomatic relations with Germany. Wilson still said he wanted no conflict. But in February, he learned that Germany was plotting against the United States. A telegram sent to Mexico by German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann was intercepted and decoded by the British. The telegram proposed a German-Mexican alliance if the United States went to war against Germany. If Germany won the war, it promised to return Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona to Mexico. Wilson released the contents of the Zimmermann letter to the public shortly after he asked Congress for authority to arm merchant ships. In mid-March, German submarines sank 4 unarmed American merchant ships. It became clear that no one was immune to German aggression. Then the president, who had tried to keep America out of war, asked the Congress to declare it.
It is a war against all nations. I advise that the Congress declare the recent course of the imperial German government to be, in fact, nothing less than war against the government and people of the United States, and that it take immediate steps to exert all its power and employ all its resources to bring the government of the German Empire to terms and end the war.
On April 2nd, Wilson asked Congress to declare war. For 3 days, Congress debated the matter. Not everyone wanted war.
There was never a referendum on the war. We didn't have a great vote. But we know that there was a coalition of people very strongly against the war, an unusual coalition. There were pacifists who, by religious conviction or otherwise, were simply opposed to violence and war. There was the peace movement, a very strong movement, which had a lot of support among important Americans.
Despite the opposition, the United States House and Senate voted by large majorities to declare war on April the 6th, 1917.